welcome to, I don't even know which Pluriversal Design Book Club. We've had so many over the last academic year, but today is like a really special one. We have like 3,000 people have signed up for this one because this one is going to be, it is about decolonizing methodologies, and it's going to be led by Renata, who is a rock star. So Renata, I'm going to ask you just hand it over to you. Um, and then you could give some plugs for us. I'll be muting people every now and again, and I mean, please don't take any offense to that, right? But yes, Renata, and I just kind of handed it over, but you could give some plugs to the DRS and Pivot and all of that if you like now.
No, but I think it's important. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Renata Leitão, and we have to celebrate because we are completing 2 years of Pluriversal Design SIG, 2 years and 10 years of friendship between Leslie and I. So this book club that we have, in fact, was we've been exchanging books and discussing books for the past 10 years. And so I'm very happy that now we are inviting more people to discuss the books that we love, that we read. Leslie, would you like to add something?
So actually there's something interesting to add. You know, how did we start this book club? Last year we, well, through the Pluriversal Design SIG, which is a group in the DRS, you'll hear us talk about it often, and the DRS is the Design Research Society. But we hosted a mini conference called Pivot, and we were challenging authors at Pivot to use references in their reference list that were not European, not by, I guess, white men. You know, so the book club really started with us challenging people to diversify their reading list. Okay, so you know, everyone will cite Nigel Cross and will cite Donald Norman and then people, you know, as we asked people to diversify their reading list, they would come back and say, but we don't know anybody. So the book club became that project of, okay, people think that they cannot find non-European authors, non-white authors, non-male authors. Well, let's challenge this a little bit and let's find some other texts, and we use text in a broad sense, right? But let's find some other texts that people can then know about and then include in their bibliographies in the work that they do, right? It's a low pressure group because we're not actually asking you to read the books. We hope that you read them, but we present the books and present some key points. And then we also invite other people to present books. So Renata and I started off doing it, and then we opened it up to lots of other people to present. And that has been like a really exciting project as well, to learn about the other books that people are reading.
Yes, and that's something that when we began, people started to say, no, but there aren't many books written by non-white authors, authors of color. And now we have so many because we are looking for, we've been searching, we've been tuned with that goal. Now we have so many that it's difficult to choose. It's difficult to choose which books we are presenting. So it means that we have lots of things planned for next semester. And if you have any suggestion of a book that is important to you that you would like to present, please suggest. And we are stopping for the summer, during the summer, but in September we will be back discussing new authors and new books. So let's start with decolonizing methodologies. I'll share my screen. So the book today is Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous People. I'm presenting the original, the first edition, written by Linda Tuhiwai Smith. And first, I'm in Montreal now, so I'd like to begin by acknowledge that the city of Montreal is located on unceded Indigenous land. And the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, oops, I can't see my screen, is recognized as the custodians of the lands on which I stand. Montreal is historically known as the gathering place of many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. So I invite you to think for a moment of the lands on which you stand today. Who are the original custodians of that land, the traditional custodians of that land? So, Decolonizing Methodologies, published in '99, is a seminal text, is a landmark. There is like I can't even describe how important this book is, because it changed the discourse on the relationship between Western research and Indigenous people. Only that. So it was written by Linda Tuhiwai Smith, so a Maori from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and she is not a designer, of course. She's a professor of Indigenous education. She's an educator. And the book, it's not formally divided in two parts, but it is divided in two parts. So at the first part, she tries to explain why Indigenous people have a loathing and distrust of research. And the second part examines the different approaches and methodologies that are being developed by Indigenous people working as researchers in Indigenous communities. So now I'd like to keep our tradition of inviting people to read along. I'm going to share a Google Doc with you. So we all are going to read together some passages of the book. Just a moment. Another person reads the next paragraph, and so on and so on and so on. So from the vantage point of the colonized, a position from which I write and choose to privilege, the term research is inextricably linked to European imperialism and colonialism. The word itself, research, is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. Next person.
This collective memory of imperialism has been perpetuated through the ways in which knowledge about Indigenous peoples was collected and classified, and then represented in various ways back to the West, and then through the eyes of the West back to those who have been colonized. Edward Said refers to this process as a Western discourse about the other, which is supported by institutions, vocabulary, scholarship, imagery, doctrines, even colonial bureaucracies and colonial styles.
This book identifies research as a significant side of struggle between the interests and ways of knowing of the West and the interests and ways of resisting of the other. In this example, the other has been constituted with a name, a face, a particular identity, namely Indigenous peoples.
Many researchers, academics, and project workers may see the benefits of their particular research projects as serving a greater good for mankind, or serving a specific emancipatory goal for an oppressed community, but believe in the ideal that benefiting mankind is indeed a primary outcome of scientific research is as much as a reflection of ideology as it is of academic training.
Indigenous peoples across the world have other stories to tell, which not only question the assumed nature of those ideals and the practices that they generate, but also serve to tell an alternate story, the history of Western research through the eyes of the colonized.
The term indigenous is problematic in that it appears to collectivize many distinct populations whose experiences under imperialism have been vastly different.
The final S in Indigenous peoples has been argued for quite vigorously by Indigenous art activists because of the right of peoples to self-determination. It is also used as a way of recognizing that there are real differences between different Indigenous peoples.
The term has enabled the collective voices of colonized people to be expressed strategically in the international arena. It has also been an umbrella enabling communities and peoples to come together, transcending their own colonized contexts and experiences in order to learn, share, plan, organize, and struggle collectively for self-determination on the global and local stages.
Thus, the world's indigenous populations belong to a network of peoples. They share experiences as peoples who have been subjected to the colonization of their lands and cultures and the denial of their sovereignty by a colonizing society that has come to dominate and determine the shape and quality of their lives, even after it has formally pulled out.
Imperialism frames the indigenous experience. It is part of our story, our version of modernity.
The concepts of imperialism and colonialism are crucial ones which are used across a range of disciplines, often with meanings which are taken for granted. The two terms are interconnected, and what is generally agreed upon is that colonialism is but one expression of imperialism.
On being human, one of the supposed characteristics of primitive people was that we could not use our minds or intellects. We could not invent things. We could not create institution or history. We could not imagine. We could not produce anything of value. We did not know how to use land and other resources from the natural world. We did not practice the arts of civilization. By lacking such virtues, we disqualified ourselves, not just from civilization, but from humanity itself.
Colonized peoples have been compelled to define what it means to be human because there is a deep understanding of what it has meant to be considered not fully human, to be savage.
A critical aspect of the struggle for self-determination has involved questions relating to our history as Indigenous peoples and a critique of how we, as the other, have been represented or excluded from various accounts.
Under colonialism, Indigenous peoples have struggled against a Western view of history and yet have been complicit with that view. We have often allowed our histories to be told and have them become outsiders as we heard them being retold. Schooling is directly implicated in this process. Through the curriculum and its underlying theory of knowledge, early schools redefined the world and where Indigenous peoples were positioned within the world.
Maps of the world reinforced our place on the periphery of the world, although we were still considered part of the empire. This included having to learn new names for our own lands.
Our colonial experience traps us in the project of modernity. There can be no postmodern for us until we have settled some business of the modern. It means that there is unfinished business, that we are still being and know it, and that we are still searching for justice.
Coming to know the past has been part of the critical pedagogy of decolonization. To hold alternative histories is to hold alternative knowledge. The pedagogical implication of this access to alternative knowledge is that they can form the basis of alternative ways of doing things.
One of the problems discussed in the first section of this book is that the methodologies and methods of research, the theories that inform them, the questions which they generate, and the writing styles they employ all become significant acts which need to be considered carefully and critically before being applied. In other words, they need to be decolonized.
Decolonization, however, does not mean and has not meant a total rejection of all theory or research or Western knowledge. Rather, it is about centering our concerns and worldviews and then coming to know and understand theory and research from our own perspectives and for our own purposes.
Research through imperial eyes describes an approach which assumes that Western ideas about the most fundamental things are the only ideas possible to hold, certainly the only rational ideas and the only ideas which can make sense of the world, of reality, of social life, and of human beings.
Part 2, 25 Indigenous projects. I'm not including all the 25 Indigenous projects because we would have to read for a long time. I just included a few ideas. So the implications for Indigenous research, which have been derived from the imperatives inside the struggles of the 70s, seem to be clear and straightforward. The survival of peoples, cultures, and languages, the struggle to become self-determining, and the need to take back control of our destinies.
These imperatives have demanded more than rhetoric and acts of defiance. The act of reclaiming, reformulating, and reconstituting Indigenous cultures and languages have required the mounting of an ambitious research program, one that is very strategic in its purpose and activities and relentless in its pursuit of social justice. Within the program are a number of very distinct projects.
In a sense, colonialism has reduced Indigenous peoples to making claims and assertions about our rights and dues. It is an approach that has a certain noisiness to it. Indigenous peoples, however, have transformed claiming into an interesting and dynamic process. Considerable work and energy has gone into developing the methodologies which relate to claiming and reclaiming.
Storytelling, oral histories, the perspectives of elders and of women have become an integral part of all Indigenous research. Each individual story is powerful. But the point about the stories is not that they simply tell a story or tell a story simply. These new stories contribute to a collective story in which every Indigenous person has a place.
For many Indigenous writers, stories are ways of passing down the beliefs and values of a culture in the hope that the new generations will treasure them and pass the story down further. The story and the storyteller both serve to connect the past with the future, one generation with the other, the land with the people, and the people with the story.
Celebrating.
Go.
Thank you. Celebrating survival is a particular sort of approach. While non-Indigenous research has been intent on documenting the demise and cultural assimilation of Indigenous peoples, celebrating survival accentuates not so much our demise, but the degree to which Indigenous peoples and communities have successfully retained cultural and spiritual values and authenticity.
Remembering. The remembering of a people relates not so much to an idealized remembering of a golden past, but more specifically to the remembering of a painful past, and importantly, people's responses to that pain. This form of remembering is painful because it involves remembering not just what colonization was about, but what being dehumanized meant for our own cultural practices.
Intervening. Intervening takes action research to mean literally the process of being proactive and of becoming involved as an interested worker for change. Intervention-based projects are usually designed around making structural and cultural changes.
Representing. Indigenous communities have struggled since colonization to be able to exercise what is viewed as a fundamental right, that is, to represent ourselves. The Representing Project spans both the notion of representation as a political concept and representation as a form of voice and expression.
Representation is also a project of Indigenous artists, writers, poets, filmmakers, and others who attempt to express an Indigenous spirit, experience, or worldview. It is also about proposing solutions to the real-life dilemmas that Indigenous communities confront and trying to capture the complexities of being Indigenous.
One of the strategies which Indigenous peoples have employed effectively to bind people together politically is a strategy which asks that people imagine a future, that they rise above present day situations which are generally depressing, dream a new dream, and set a new vision. The confidence of knowing that we have survived and can only go forward provides some impetus to a process of envisioning.
Reframing is about taking much greater control over the ways in which Indigenous issues and social problems are discussed and handled. One of the reasons why so many of the social problems which besets Indigenous communities are never solved is that the issues have been framed in a particular way. The framing of an issue is about making the decisions about its parameters, about what is in the foreground, what is in the background, and what shadings or complexities exist within the frame. The project of reframing is related to defining the problem or issues and determining how best to solve that problem.
Reframing occurs also with the way Indigenous people write or engage with theories and accounts of what it means to be Indigenous. In the politics of Indigenous women, for example, there is continuing resistance to the way Western feminists have attempted to define the issues of Indigenous women and categorize the positions in which Indigenous women should be located.
Creating. The project of creating is not just about the artistic endeavors of individuals, but about the spirit of creating, which Indigenous communities have exercised over thousands of years. Imagination enables people to rise above their own circumstances, to dream new visions and to hold on to old ones. Creating is about channeling collective creativity in order to produce solutions to Indigenous problems.
The final project discussed here is about sharing knowledge between Indigenous peoples, around networks and across the world of Indigenous peoples. Sharing contains views about knowledge being a collective benefit and knowledge being a form of resistance.
Sharing is a responsibility of research. The technical term for this is the dissemination of results, usually very boring to non-researchers, very technical and cold and very cold. For Indigenous researchers, sharing is about demystifying knowledge and informing and in speaking in plain terms to the community.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. So I chose the projects that I think are more relevant to design research and to designers, but the list of projects is so nice. And then after the description of the 25 projects, Linda Smith shows a case study that takes place in New Zealand. Something that I think it's very important to tell about this book is that even if she's from New Zealand, so she connects with the struggles of many parts of the world. So she makes reference to a lot to Edward Said in Orientalism. She makes reference to Paulo Freire in Brazil, even to Welsh language. So it's something that takes the notion of indigenous people in a very broad sense. Of really colonized people who are struggling with imperialism now, and something that I really think that it's something that it's not so easy to make links between so many different cultures as she does. So that's why this book is so important. And my question: how many people read the book? Yeah. Just when you say, I really recommend it because that's really the groundbreaking book, and it's exactly because she makes those links between different forms of colonization. She doesn't only take the view of peoples who were colonized by the English. She really gets other forms of colonization. This is an amazing reference for anyone who's interested in the pluriverse or social design. It just I really think that's the first book we should read. But now, do you have questions or comments?
Renata, well, it's a comment. So I teach at OCAD University also in the Strategic Foresight and Innovation program. And we just yesterday did our final presentations, and we did a foresight around the futures of space. And so we were looking at what it might look like, concepts around moving into space from the perspective of different organizations, one of which was just called Terra Nullius because it was about the idea that the land in space had not yet been claimed. And what came up in that conversation was really fascinating to me because it challenged a lot of some of the ideas that I have about what social design should look like and what doing well might mean. What we realized was that a lot of the ideas and values that were held by the organization that wanted to capture the land that was in space now were things that we thought were right and good. And we were thinking about, well, but back when, colonization was happening, there was a firm belief that what was happening was right and good just as well. And so how do you ever, I don't know, I think I'm just challenged with the idea of social design because I always know that it feels like something won't be considered,
I really thank you so much for your question, because most of the colonization, it's something that was perpetrated with the excuse of doing good. It's something that we are bringing civilization to the savages, and the savages have to be extremely thankful because, oh my God, we are receiving that. And it's something that I didn't chose some passages of the book that talk about the indigenous problem, because it would be something very, very, very long. But basically what she says is that their way of life, the way they are, is always framed as a problem. The indigenous problem. It's always a problem that has to be solved. And people try, like missionaries try to solve it with conversion. People try to solve it with a development process. And then you can have a capacity building, and then you have the empowerment, and then you have this, and then you have that. It's always people trying to solve their problem. So when you think that people from outside are trying to solve the problems, it's always imperialistic, always. Period. There is no other way to define it. Why do they have problems? Of course they have. They have been colonized. There is like the denial of humanity, the denial of basic rights. There are so many other so many problems, but not in the way that is usually framed. So how people can really work with them? It's not by, okay, I'm going to solve that problem, because this is colonization. That's why they say colonization is still here. They are still being colonized. And how they are usually colonized is by people trying to solve the problems to them. That's it. So basically, what this just tells about the research of creativity, innovation, it's creativity, innovation inside the community. So outsiders, social designers can support that. It's a supporting role. It's not you are doing something for them. It's different. So the reframing of the questions is one of the most important things that we can do. That's my that's basically my point of view. I don't know if it answered the question. Comment.
Thank you. No, well, what I hear from that is that the work of social design is more around supporting innovation and creativity in groups, or not teaching them what to do, but teaching them the process.
Teaching.
No,
it's complicated.
Oh, that's more.
Yeah, well, this is what I mean. Like, I was trying to figure out, what is this social design? What does that mean?
Just first get to know the process, the creative process of the community, because they have a if they survived. And I read the land acknowledgement of Montreal, but my hometown back in Brazil, Curitiba, the traditional custodians of that city were extinct. They didn't survive. So many, like thousands, millions of people didn't survive. If they survived because they were creative. They had strength enough to survive. So you have to give them the credit for surviving. So study what is the innovative process of that community, and then support them. And then you can bring the tools. But everything starts with the community. That's the only way of not practicing colonialism.
Stella has a question in the chat, and then Fahad also has his hand raised. Stella, would you like to read your question, or would you like us to read it? Maybe I read it. Oh, yes, there you are, Stella.
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
So I find it quite interesting. I mean, I'm framing right now something, inclusivity. It's not exactly the same topic, but the kind of is becoming a bit of a buzzword. And then I noticed that people kind of jump on it, and sometimes they are the people that I don't know how to express it. Who would be the ones that should kind of more take a listening stance, or take more of a giving space to other stance, but instead they want to take that space to show that they are on it, that they are involved in this topic, and that they are at the front of it. And that I don't know how to respond to that, because of course it's good that they're on the topic, that they're saying, yeah, I'm now interested in inclusivity and all this. But on the other hand, then if they are the loudest voices, then I don't know how to respond to that. So I was just wondering whether that book addresses that. at all?
I don't think the book especially addresses it, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It's something it's just that there is something that the book addresses. There is something that the book addresses is the fact that the colonialism is always changing itself and adapting and taking space. And I see over and over and over that people take the terms that are used to create social change to use in a way that is completely meaningless. So it happens a lot. It happens a lot. So what is inclusivity? It's about giving, for me, it's more about giving space of other ways of thinking than about to talking about different groups of people.
Yeah, I think there's a connection there to the, I can say in the academic world that I operate in, decolonizing has become a word that seems to be appropriated and claimed by a lot of white academics, but not really used in a way that is about rethinking our systems and structures of academia, which are based on colonialist models. It's more about sort of like, I'll put in a couple non-white, readings, and we'll call that decolonizing the curriculum. Like, it's always a way that's going to fit back into these structures that exist, rather than challenging the structures themselves and really thinking about reframing the whole academic operation. So it seems to be like, yes, like distilled into this buzzword that can make people, especially white people, feel good about ourselves, and I've also more recently heard a lot the term like indigenizing the curriculum. And again, this is definitely not coming from Indigenous perspective. It's, not really coming from something that is challenging the entire structure of the thing and thinking like with a systems mindset. It's more, like, this is the latest buzzword. This is how I can, show that I care while maintaining my status, my privilege, my power within this institution.
And there is something about just Linda commented about sharing, that you have to share. It's about bringing into simple terms to ideas that people can understand. And sometimes using the buzzword is something just that you don't have to really discuss what is important. By using the buzzword, you don't have to make sense of the experience. You just repeat that buzzword over and over again. That's something that happens a lot. So Fahad has the hand raised.
Yeah, I think my question is honestly somewhat along the same lines as Stella's, in the sense. So I do a lot of work with nonprofits and the government here in Houston, in Texas, and I do mostly work as a design researcher, as a designer, as a facilitator, and I always struggle with the role of nonprofits and government being that of organizers of people, right? And they see their role as coming in and providing resources to people. And so and then when you especially talk about in the situation of like a city like Houston, where climate change is so real, like every year we have a major disaster. In the past 6 years, we've had 8 federally declared disasters. When you're living in such an urgent, sort of needy situation, like, it's been so hard to tell people to stop and pay attention to other communities. And I think it's similar to Stella's question in the sense of like people being like, oh, this is our work. And it's like, no, actually, I think we just need to stop. But then if we say we stop, then people are gonna die, is what people retaliate with. And it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm rambling now, and I always have this tension, and I don't know what to do with it.
But at the same time, I totally understand. I totally get it, because there is, we can't lie. Many people live in situations that are very, very dire. And now with climate change, we have even more disasters even more problem. Then you have like the migrant waves. We have even more situations that are completely critical, and we can't stop helping, because it's almost as if you would stop people from bleeding, of having just a critical situation. But you have to see that that will not solve the problem. This is something that is urgent, but does it really create change? No, it really mitigates the disaster. That's different. So maybe we should have like words to define the practices that are for mitigating the disaster, and practices that are to create structural change, because they are different. And I can't say that you have to stop mitigating the disaster. We have to, but it doesn't change the structure of society. It doesn't change imperialism. So I don't.
That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Hello, everyone. Gloria here, actually.
Hi, Gloria.
Hi. I live in New Zealand. So, of course, thank you guys for suggesting this book. It's going to be very helpful. I have two comments. Actually, one comment, but two experiences. I have sat in the last 2 weeks. I attended two meetings. One meeting was organized by the IT professionals of New Zealand to discuss topics on the digital skills of New Zealanders. It's a report that came out recently, developed by a government body, which found problematic the digital skills for many in New Zealand, including Maori people and Pacifica. I went to a hui. A hui is a meeting in which these digital skills were discussed, and members of the Maori community and Pacifica community came. My comment is in connection to what the Maori community would like everyone to do who wants to support or just make companionship of the addressing the needs in digital skills in the work environment in New Zealand. They said we need to develop approaches, strategies, or technologies that are for Maori, by Maori, and with Maori. So basically what they are asking is that the solutions should come from within, and the Pacifica people as well. Interestingly enough, 2 weeks ago, also I sat in another meeting with people with impairments. And the way that they are addressing the situation for people with impairments, I was in this meeting, and we were discussing how design could contribute or support, and representatives from the impairment community, the disability community, wanted the able-bodied people, to learn more about them, to help them solve their issues, because some of the people with impairments are quite impaired. So it's interesting, these two positions. When I'm listening to what we are discussing here, is like there is a group of a community, the indigenous peoples would like to be left to work solutions themselves, but in the inclusion realm, they need us to become more knowledgeable about how to design for inclusion. So I don't know, I'm just bringing this to because we are discussing inclusion and indigenous methodologies today. And I'm sitting in meetings, listening to people telling us how they would like designers to intervene.
So, and I think it's very important just to ask. don't arrive just supposing that you know how to intervene. So first thing, ask. That's like a basic respect.
Mm-hmm.
So someone else,
Pegala
Pegala?
As a hand.
Thank you. It's I know my name can be difficult to pronounce. Kegala Hlichetko. I carry 2 Indigenous names, and I work as a scientist. And I came across your work of design, the language of inclusivity, pluriversality of academia is not part of my vocabulary, but I came across it because increasingly I work with communities, my own communities and Indigenous communities across Canada. And I really appreciate the comment that someone made around the fact that this language is not the language that we as Indigenous peoples use, the language of decolonizing and indigenizing. Instead, I think part of the challenge that I see and that I observe, both in my work and in my practice, I trained as a scientist, and I've learned some very imperialistic, colonialistic research practices and ideologies, and have had to learn a completely new vocabulary that's recentered around resistance and recentered around liberation and freedom. And what does that look like? And what does that feel like? And what I'm experiencing, even in myself, as I grow in this journey, is really that we can't just approach this from an intellectual and from an analytical realm. And what we've started to do within community is not simply work with researchers coming in and sort of imposing these new processes and introducing these new ideas. What we do is we build relationship. What we do is recognize that the knowledge of the land and the knowledge of the people, that knowledge is sufficient to create the health and the healing and the well-being that's needed for not only these communities, but for these collective societies to be able to work in place. And we know this because this is how these communities have survived for millennia. And so what are the appropriate ways for us to ensure that people going into these places and spaces not only honor and respect that, but we as Indigenous peoples have an opportunity to teach and to invite people in. And we do that through celebrating, we do that through dance, we do that through healing. It's not just intellectual discourse, and it's not just procedure and practices and protocols. There's a real shifting of spirit, of how people begin to know themselves when they are on our lands. And I think this is part of the piece that might be missing from what's happening, or at least what I observed happening within these academic and very analytical and intellectual processes. But anyway, I thank you for the materials, and thank you for introducing me to this whole new set of realities and worlds, and I'm really appreciative to be here. Goodness cheese, thank you.
Thank you so much. Obrigada. And where are you from? Just.
Oh, sure. So I'll introduce you myself in my mother's language first. So she's in Tlakatmu. So she in Joatin Squashli Tleko. So I carry my grandmother's name in my mother's language, which means rain falling on water. And in my father's language, he speaks Southern Chichoni. I'm a member of the Crow clan, and that is the Champagne-Najak First Nation, which is the community that I was born and raised in, which is in southwestern Yukon, northwestern BC, southeastern Alaska, and it's a self-governing nation within the fabric of Canada.
So thank you so much. Please add your contact in the chat box, and we can talk, and maybe you can present something else to this group. That would be lovely. Absolutely. And I totally agree that just there is no way of getting to know about indigenous worldviews in epistemologies just by reading, but just by intellectual. It's not. It's just. It's land. It's movement. It's music. It's rhythm. It's really plants and spirit and learning from the sun and learning from with the stars. So there is a lot to be done. What we try to do here, like Leslie, and we try to create this more informal, like congenial situations that is like a little bit less academic, so we can discuss it. That's our intention. Any more question or comment?
I'm starting to put the other book clubs in the chat because I know that people will start to drop off the call. So please feel free to join us again. And then now I'll make, I guess, a comment that I don't remember what I wanted to comment again. Oh, Gloria was talking about two different contexts, but I guess the key message, and maybe this comes back to Stella's point, the key message is really like for us, by us. So, you know, if we are doing work in quotes for a particular group and there's no one represented, you know, the group is not representative of that people, then we're doing this wrong, you know, and it could be about race, it could be about gender, it could be about sexuality, inclusion. It's kind of, I'm sure the disability movement didn't expect this for us, not about us, without us banner to become so widely accepted, but that's really kind of the banner that we have to bring into everything that we do. You know, it's not really about us as individual designers, it's about the groups that we're working with, and we have to learn to step back to make this work happen better. And then maybe another point, just because I'm talking. I actually worked in development for many years and really struggled with this. You know, this is how development work is set up, right? International development work. You go into somebody's place in a really colonizing way, and you tell people, well, this is your problem. And then you create a solution and you say, this is the solution that you should use because I'm the expert and I said that you should use it. And, you know, people ask me today, so what's the solution? And actually, I don't know, right? I don't know if anybody needs a designer from outside to come in and help them design a better product like that. So, you know, I think maybe Fahad, somebody talked about existential crisis, or I read what they were, existential crisis, into what they were saying. And I think, yeah, I've been living in existential crisis for a few years, but I think there are other roles that we can occupy as designers. And, you know, I'm starting to get more comfortable with that, you know, doing other work as designer. And I know someone put into the chat that facilitating is also problematic or complicated, but, you know, that's also a role that we can move into, yeah, as we do this week.
One last comment, because I just read that in the chat box, someone suggested a text from Eve Tuck, Decolonization is not a metaphor. It's another seminal text that I think everybody should read. I think just something that as a South American, I think that as Linda Smith, she tries to frame the experience of colonization in many different ways, because there are so many different realities. And she writes a lot about slavery, because slavery is the ultimate form of colonization. And this, sometimes I think Eve Tuck writes in a way that is much more specific to English colonization. So she doesn't take in consideration other forms. I think that's a very big difference between the way they write. But I totally love Eve Tuck. I think it's another super important text.